Welcome back to News Talk and our conversation with Kenyon McDuffie. He's a member of the D.C. Council, a Democrat from Ward 5. He chairs the Committee on Judiciary, which has oversight over public safety. And we've been talking, for the most part, about public safety. Remind you that phone lines are open at 703-387-1020. For those of you watching in the 11 a.m. hour, your chance to join the conversation, discuss whatever issue is most important for you. We'll go to the phones as your calls come in. Grab an open line if you'd like to be part of the conversation today. I want to ask you about a non-crime issue. We got a tweet before the show from Southwest D.C. Jen. She asks Councilman McDuffie, why is the council and the mayor silent on WMATA?
Well, I'm not sure who she's referring to when she says the council, but I've not been silent on WMATA. I will say we had the arcing incident earlier this year where, unfortunately, a life was lost. I actually convened a roundtable hearing on WMATA specifically, as well as bringing in fire and EMS in the District of Columbia and our Office of Unified Communications to try to determine where the failure occurred. Obviously, the NTSB investigation has been ongoing, but there needs to be a culture change and more of a focus on safety at WMATA. But I think we need permanent leadership, a permanent general manager at WMATA to make sure that we can carry forth some of the reforms that need to occur.
How do you get those reforms? How do you get that safety culture instilled once and for all? We were told after the 2009 accident, terrible tragedy where so many lives were lost, that safety was absolutely going to be the primary focus of the agency. Some doubt that that has in fact been the case. How, without a permanent GM in place, no disrespect against the people who are running the agency now on an interim basis, who are veterans of transit, the transit world, but without that hopefully top-tier person in place setting that strategy in motion, how do you get to the goal you just outlined?
It's difficult to get to it without that top-tier person, without a permanent general manager in place. It's been part of my frustration and why the process has taken so long. We've heard local officials here in the District of Columbia express their dismay. I am similarly disappointed and outraged, quite frankly, that the process has moved so slowly. I've spoken to my colleagues, particularly Mr. Evans, Ward 2, who is the representative on WMATA from the council, and we want to see things move forward. We have to see things move forward, and that needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Is it that each of the factions on the board that we hear about is insisting on their own way, and until they wear the other side down, we're just going to be in a place of inertia?
Obviously, we need to hold people accountable, but it's more difficult to really enforce the accountability when you've got a multi-jurisdictional agency, essentially, that you're dealing with. And so trying to make sure that you get to the heart of the issues and get agreement on issues has proven to be difficult in the past when you've seen this model in place. But I know that from the people who I've spoken to specifically, they are deeply interested in moving things forward and trying to identify and hire a permanent general manager.
Your public safety roundtable is in 2 weeks. Maybe 2 weeks from today. It's on the 16th. It's in the late afternoon. It's at the Wilson Building. Who will you have? What do you hope to achieve?
Well, we've got agency officials from the Metropolitan Police Department, as well as the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice in the District of Columbia. And importantly, we want community members to come down, as well as experts, both in academia and those who work in the nonprofit world. We've engaged them. We want them to come down, and we want them to testify. Now, here's what we want them to do, Bruce. We want everybody to focus on solutions. We know that there is a problem. It's difficult to put your finger on precisely what the problem is, but we know that we've got a spike in homicides, and everybody should be outraged by that. And we want to focus on solutions on September 16th. We put the hearing at 5 o'clock p.m. so that we can try to capture some of the folks who get off from work, because we want it to be inclusive. We want the community to make sure that they provide their input into solutions as well.
The district is not alone in dealing with a spike in crime right now. How does that influence your thinking about what's driving all this, and to what extent do you think it drives MPD's approach as they grapple with all this?
So part of this is making sure that we're collecting the right data. We know that the District of Columbia is different from other parts of the country. We're different from Milwaukee. We're different from Chicago. We're different from Philadelphia. And we've seen spikes in other areas, but looking at best practices, looking at implementing a more robust community policing model. My staff and I have been really doing some research over the recess period for the council so that we can introduce some legislation when we come back in September to make sure that we're addressing the issues. And I think putting in place a more robust community policing model that really engages people. And I'm not talking about just community policing as a buzzword where folks want to see more officers on the streets. Obviously, we should have more officers, and we're working with the chief, and she's doing some things around deployment. We've got more officers on bikes, segways, and outside of their vehicles, but we also need to make sure that the community is involved. There are individuals and organizations that have worked in some of the most hardest hit communities in the District of Columbia where we're seeing the spike in these homicides, and they know a lot of these individuals. Let's identify them. Let's make sure that we know what their needs are, and let's work hard. Let's double our efforts to really get in those communities and provide the resources that they need.
The FOP says we're dealing with a shrinking force at a time when we have a growing population, that city leaders on the council, the MPD, wherever, has allowed, whether it's through the retirement wave bubble that we're starting to see, or attrition, or people leaving because they don't like it, or better offers, whatever, that the numbers are going in the wrong direction. A shrinking force. We're not at 4,000 at a time when the population, you have to go back decades to find a time when as many people called D.C. home as do now.
Right, and there have been times in D.C. where we had more officers in place, but I don't know if that necessarily is a causation or correlation to having more officers, meaning that there's less crime. We had less crime just a couple of years ago in 2012 and 13, where we saw homicides less than 100. And I don't know that that's the answer, but here's what I know, Bruce, from talking to residents throughout the District of Columbia. They are not interested in finger pointing. They want solutions. They want law enforcement to be at the table, obviously, because their input, particularly the rank and file, their input and morale is essential to our public safety here in the District of Columbia. But at the same time, we need to broaden our approach. Again, MPD is not going to solve this problem by themselves. The chief is not going to be able to solve this problem by herself. We need an all-hands-on-deck approach to government to make sure that the right agencies are at the table.
To the phones. Let's pick up on line 3. That'll give us a chance to say hello to Paula in Northwest. Hi, caller. You're on the air.
Thank you. I'm calling because I think that one thing that's being overlooked in the causal factors involved with the spike in violence is the fact that marijuana was legalized in the district, and it's been legalized in 4 other states at this point in time. If you look at the anecdotal and the research evidence, you'll see that there has been a spike in violence in the places and in suicides, in fact, and in all kinds of harmful behaviors as a result of the legalization of marijuana and the permissive attitudes that the legalization has caused.
Paula, let me get Councilman McDuffie's reaction to that. Thank you for the call.
And thank you for the call, Paula. I don't know that the legalization of marijuana has been the reason why we've seen the spike in homicides, and I don't know, I have not seen any data that would make that case. I will say this. I think part of why we're seeing the spike in homicides, a huge part of why we're seeing the spike in homicides, and the fact that we have any homicides is the culture of violence that exists. The fact that there are some people in our society who feel like the violence is a way of life. If I'm offended, I am going to respond to a conflict by picking up a gun. And that, Bruce, to me, is a failure of our society and our government and its policies, and I think that's something that needs to change.
In the couple seconds that we have left, is the council thinking about, are you approaching some way of honoring your former colleague, the Ward 8 councilman and the former mayor, Marion Barry?
Yeah, sure. So the mayor, as you know, Bruce, established a commission to work on that, and we're waiting for the results of the work, and I'm really eager to make sure that we have a fitting way to recognize somebody who meant so much to the District of Columbia.
A former current Ward 5 D.C. Councilman Kenyon McDuffie, Chairman of the Committee on Judiciary. Thanks very much for coming in. Good luck with your roundtable. It's on the 16th. It's at 5 p.m. It's at the Wilson.
Thank you, Bruce.
Appreciate your time. Talk with you again soon. We are back with a program note right after this.